So also, we want to finish up our discussion that we began yesterday with Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, and we were discussing the case where the Kohen leaves the Azorah, and the Gemara vacillates back and forth whether or not he needs a new Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. It seems that if he left for a serious period of time, I don't know how significant of a time it was, but nevertheless, he would need a new Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. We had one man who said Lina Poselis Es HaKiddush. Then for sure, if he left the Azorah, that would be a Yitzia with a psul of Lina, and he would certainly need another Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. So what we're up to now is here on page Yud Zayin, the second paragraph, Yitzia Hamura Kan. Nefleku bar rishon, v'yesh misha kosim shemiyotza b'shas avoda, v'lo shah b'chutz el ma'at, eino toim kiddush shenis l'kuliam. The only possibility that he would need a new Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim would be if he left for a significant period of time. But if he left only ma'at, everybody would agree that you don't need a new Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. That's according to one school of thought in the Rishonim. He has here a footnote, Shintes Vav. He attributes this to Shitas HaTos. Whereas the Minchas Chinuch seems to assume that the Rambam would disagree, and you need Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim if he leaves in the middle of his Avodah and he goes out of the Azor. But at least according to the Bali HaTos, time of Mishum to be Yitzia b'shas Avodah l'zman muad, Eino nechsheves Yitzia lifsol. Since he's always connected back to the Avodah, back to the Azorah, that's not considered a Yitzia. Hito mayim o hisach raglov tzarch loshuv ulekadish. Right? If he had to urinate, then the urination, which in a sense passels him temporarily for avoda, that itself constitutes a hefsek requiring a brand new Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. And in a case where he's obligated in Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim and he does the avoda without, then avodasa psula. And we touched on this yesterday, that Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim makes the Kohen into a Kohen ha'oved. It makes him into a royal avodah. Now, in addition to Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, under certain conditions, he needs tevilah in a mikvah. Isach raglav tzarch gam litpa. And that's a Gemara in Zvachim Adaf Chafam Beis. But again, we didn't study tevilah. That's just the one comment that we have regarding tevilah. Nitma Kohen betuma shedayla betfila lechud the eino tzarach heriv shemesh o betuma shetzricha la heriv shemesh ach nitma samach leheriv shemesh v'taval beheriv shimsho stafik b'gmarim ton gam kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. So we're talking about a case where the Kohen contracted Tumah in one of the following two scenarios. Either the Tumah only requires Tevilah, and that's it, or in a case where the Tevilah requires not only, where the Tumah requires not only Tevilah, but also Hariv Shemesh, and he became tummy towards the end of the day, right before Hariv Shemesh. He therefore went into the mikvah, and then there was Hariv Shemesh. So according to one side of the Gemara, he does not need another Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Why? Because the Tefillah only required either the Tumah only required either Tefillah or maximum Kiddush Yadayim or maximum required Hariv Shemesh. And La Locha Tzarech L'Kadosh B'Safek. Since there's another side of the Gemara that maybe he does need Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, then l'chatchila he needs Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim mitzad Safek. However, if he did the avodah without doing a Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, his avodah b'di'evet is kshera, because it's only a l'chatchila requirement mitzad Safek. However, in a full-fledged tumah, for example, a tumah shetzricha tefillah ve'erev shem, she needs both tefillah and erev shem. So nitma shelo b'sarach le'erev shem. He contracted this tumah earlier in the day. Ton kiddush bevadai, everyone would agree. Mishum hesech hadas mi'avod, because he's not involved in the avod. And because he became Tomei, he's going to have to separate himself from the Avodah. And he won't be royal Avodah until the end of the day after sunset. So that's already a chunk of time that we can classify as Hesech Hadas, and it generates another chiyuv of Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Hisifdato Mishmiras Yarach. What happens if he didn't pay attention to one of his two hands or one of his 2 feet? And it's possible they came in contact with tinuf or with tumah. He still is very careful about the other leg, his other hand. So there's such a thing as Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim in segments. And this we discussed yesterday. We thought it might depend upon what Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim is. If it's right hand on the right side and left hand on the left side, then maybe we're separating between 2 parts of his body, and there's a separate kiyum of Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim on each part. And therefore, if there was Shmira on one part, the right side, let's say, but not on the left, then he doesn't need a Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim on both sides, only on that side where there was Hesech Hadas. And let's see if we can remind ourselves back on Tezayim, right? Tezayim, just to remind ourselves what the case that we discussed yesterday means. What was the case that said, I don't have it right now at my fingertips. Anybody remember? No, I don't remember. We had at the bottom a case of Noga b'yodov oberagla b'dvar tinuf. He compares it to Natilas Yadayim. That's the closest that we got. All right. So now we're up to Mei HaKiyar. On the bottom of Yud Zayin, Nechleku Tanoim in Mei Kiyar Ksherim Rak Mi Mei Mayon O Ksherim Gam Mishar Memos. I wish he would develop this. He just sort of whets our appetite. Like, for example, we know that in Mei Chatos, like of a Paraduma, we have a special status of Mei Maya. In Tefillah b'mikvah, we don't need Mei Maya, but we cannot use Mayim She'uvin. So I suspect that this sugi that he's quoting from Chav Beis touches on the relationship between Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim and Tvila B'Mikvah. Nechluku Amoroim in Meikir Nifsalim Belina Lekuli Alma Oshenim Nifsalim Laman Diyom Shegam Yadayim Nifsalim Belina. We had a mandiyomar that Yodayim, after he did Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, is Nifsalim Belina. And the same halacha that applies to the Yodayim should apply to the Meikir. So we have one opinion that says that if you hold Yodayim Nifsalim Belina, then and only then is Meikir Nifsalim Belina. We have another mandiyom who says no, irrelevant to the question of Yadayim Nifsalim Belina, Meikir or Nifsalim Belina. Ukideshlo Yipasu Amayim Belina. Now, you put in the water into the kiyar on Sunday, and now you want to use it on Monday. By definition, before you have a psul of lina. So how did they circumvent this psul of lina? Asa Kohen Gadol Ben Kotin. Okay, the name of this Kohen Gadol was Ben Kotin, and he created a muchni. So this muchni is like a wheel that goes around and around the kiyar. Ugalgol shal yodim ugalgol and sakiyar lebar, and therefore yidei muchni zeh hayu mishakin es hakiyar b'mayon shahoya tachas hazor. So this wheel was engineered in such a way that the Mei Kiyar would always be pushing the water down into the Mayon, which was underneath the Azor. There was a Mayon, a spring underneath the Azor. So that the Mei Kiyar was constantly connected to the Mayon, Butla, Kedushasan. So this is what really complicated and counterintuitive when he says "Ubatla Kedushasan." Because the psul lina can only be chal if it's got kedusha, but somehow through this chibur, this connection between the Mei Kiyar and the Mayon that's flowing underneath the Azara, we have a frozen situation where it's batla kedushasan. If it's batla kedushasan, then there's no psul of lina. The Shitas Rabbi Yochanan, he says in the footnote, "Hayu meshakin es hakiyar lifnei shkiyas hacham." Shitas Rabbi Chizda, "Hayu meshakin es lifnei alos hashach." So once again, he doesn't give us too much to go with or build on. We'll just take this as a very superficial introduction. So Lina Zeha Amr Meikir Nechikubo Amoroy Me Mosei Huchal Im Kfar B'Shkir Sacham and Nifsu Amayim Lavodos Haksheros Rak Yom. Immediately with sunset, you can no longer do the avoda of Yom, because the day is ended, you have to wait until tomorrow. So right now, there should be already a psul of lina with regard to the Mei Kiyar, and we were assuming that everybody agrees that Mei Kiyar nifsalim belina. And certainly if you hold Yadayim nifsalim belina, certainly Mei Kiyar nifsalim belina. But there's another Mandi Omar that says that Adayin him ksherim lavodos hanasos b'layla. That since Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim could be chal not only during the daylight hours, but even for the avodah of Laila, therefore there's no psul lina with regard to the Mei Kiyar at night. O she'ein amayim nifsolim el b'amud hashachar l'chol avodos. meaning that there's already going to be a psul of lina, but it's not going to be chal with shkia, it'll be postponed, and it'll only take effect at the time of Amudas Shachar. Okay, now we start a brand new topic, and that's psulei karbonos. So we can talk about psulei karbonos in the heft of the carbon. We can talk about psulei karbonos as a result of the avodas hakohen, and we'll start with the heft of the carbon. Baal mum, nafal mum, the carbon behema kodem shchita. So now the animal is a baal mum, and he wants to shecht it. Is afilu mum over, even if that blemish is something that passes by, it's meaning it's temporary. Hare hu nifsal me'akrov. Now I'm curious to know what would be according to Mandi Omer ain't dichui b'mitzvahs. So what would happen if the mum was there before shchita, but it passed, and the animal was restored to its original shleimus, its health, before shchita? Do we say that once it was possible remains possible, or do we say no? Any psul that was removed before the shchita is chazal l'kashru, so the animal goes back to its original state. Im chayes mum kavua. Now we go a step further. If it was a mum over, then it's pasul la'krav, but it still has what we call kedushas damim. Oh, take a look, by the way, in Shin Chav Dalet, he says, Ad sheyavar tamim, Ad sheyavar mum. It sounds like he's holding that if the mum was removed, it was healed before the shchita, it would be kosher. Again, if it's a mum over, then we can be poda, the hegdesh, it has the status of kedushas damim. But imayamum kavua, it doesn't fall down to the next level. Oh, wait a second. We're talking about mum kavua. Let's go over it one more time. If it's a mum over, nifsal me'akrov. Imayamum kavua, kedusha saguf shahaisa bo pokas. Menasa kedushas damim. The efshal is dosa. So why wouldn't the same halacha apply in a case of mum over? Is that what he's implying over here? Could such a thing be true? In the case of a mum kavua, it falls down to the level of chas damim. If it's a mum over, I have a feeling he means afilu. Ain't tzarich lomar zu, ela lo zu afsu. Meaning not only in a case of a mum over does it retain its status as kedushas damim, but even in the case of kedushas aguf, we can still lower it, downgrade it from kedushas aguf to the level of kedushas damim, and now he can be poded. Akoima mido umarich es erech damov upodim oso b'damim. We do what's called Hamadon Haracha, and we're poded b'damim. Ubidmei pejom mevim beima cherasi also carbon shahaisa beima nifdeis. So it's interesting. The original status of the carbon still remains. It's almost like a vestige of its old identity, and therefore, when we take the damim that we received as a pidyon, in the case where a mum kavua happened, then that money has to be designated and singled out for the same carbon. A balmum could be subject. It doesn't mean that the original bialim of the carbon have exclusive capacity to do a pidyon. Anyone could effectuate a pidyon. Af mi she'eno bialim shalot. Now, if somebody comes along and he's poda Yenim's carbon, then I don't know if he has any recourse to get a rebate on his money. I don't know. He played the role as a good Samaritan, then he's paying out of pocket. Or do we say Zachali Olam Shalom B'Fadav? I don't know. Ach mikol makom hakarban shemeviim b'dameh karev l'shem habaylim. We said that if the animal becomes a balmum, you poda, you now poda it, and you bring a carbon with the kesef b'dmei pidyon. Somebody else was poda, let's say my carbon. What happens to the damim? Do I bring the carbon, or does he bring the carbon? The halacha is that I bring the carbon. So he's not the Bala carbon, but he can be poda the carbon. The kesef pidyon accrues back to the owner of the carbon, who now will replace that carbon by buying another carbon with his stomach. And that's what he writes out. Carbon shemeviyim b'dameh karev l'shem baila. So again, this is another proof that when you poda a carbon, because it became a balmum, it still retains some of the status, the dinim of the original carbon. For example, the damim of pidyon has to be earmarked for the same identical carbon. Number two, if somebody else is poda his carbon, then the replacement carbon is ol l'shem bailim, the original owner of the carbon. Din ze omerak bezivchei behema. The ofos omru chachamim tamus v'zachrus b'behema. The aim tamus v'zachrus b'of. So the entire enterprise of mum haposim, the carbon, only applies to zivchei behem, but it does not apply to ofos. Ainu she'ein of nifsal im nafal bo mum. It's really fascinating because an oaf is relatively cheap. And you would think that we would be more demanding of a cheap carbon than we are of an expensive carbon. But no, it works the opposite. In the case of an oaf, we're going to be more lenient with the oaf. And we're going to allow you to bring this oaf as a carbon, even if it's a balmum. Because aim oaf nifsal im nafal balmum. And what it probably means is that the Torah, in creating karbanos of ophos, is breaking new ground. It's an entirely different category that, we just want you to get the carbon in. We're bending over backwards, like, for example, an ani, what we call a carbon oliviorid, we bend over backwards for an oath. Bring it. So it has a mum on it. Bring it anyway. Now, at some point, the problem with the oath is so fundamental that we're mafkia the shame carbon. It's not a carbon. It's mechusar even. Kigon yovsha gapa nikta ragla nechtita ena nifsal akrov. So the question is, can we identify a mum maguna as mechusar aver, and be mashma the difference between them, such that we subcategorize a mum maguna as if it were mechusar aver. It's just so far from a normal created oath that it doesn't belong on the mizbech. But in any event, what's fascinating here is the difference between mum and mechusar aver. That mum is a problem, but it doesn't remove the basic identity of the carbon as a behemoth or as an oath. So if it's a psul in behemoth, it's not a psul in oath. That's called a balmum. But once you get to the point where it's mechusar aver, then the oath loses its identity. It's no longer an oath. It doesn't have the parts of the body of an oath. Lo nemar pigeon el behema, aval oath shenasim mechusar aver ein podenos. Again, we're talking about a behemoth that's a balmum, and we said the balmum blocks it and disqualifies it for the mizbeach. But it still falls down to a lower category, which is called kedushas damim, and therefore it lends itself to pidyon. In the case of an oath, if you're talking about a balmum, there's no psul mum in an oath. Eli, what are you talking about? Mechusar aver. If it's mechusar aver, it's not an oath. It doesn't have a chal shem oath. You mafkir the shem oath. Then clearly there's no pidyon. Pidyon means that it still retains some vestige of its original status, albeit not as kedushas mizbeach, kedushas aguf, but at least as kedushas damim. But if it's mechusar aver, you can't talk about kedushas damim because pokat shem karba legam. Abacharva maser shenafal bamboo. Ein bohem pidyon. Now, we have never encountered a case where the mum is completely mafkia the shem hegdish. We said that the mum is a blockage, and you're not allowed to bring it on the mizbeach. Now we're going a step further. And with regard to two categories, only these two categories, Bechar and Maser, the mum completely removes the Shem Kodesh. Yatza l'chulin. He doesn't give you a clue as to why this is so uniquely in these two cases of Bechar and Maser. So it sounds like there's some sort of new halacha of pidyon in all karbanos, with the exception of these two, that even though the carbon is a balmum, there's a new halacha, and we generate a kedushas damim with the possibility of a pidyon. But we need to get special permission, so to speak, to tag on. It's like when you pass the, you take a car and you pass the test, in the city line, wherever you go, so you get a special tag. Every carbon that became a balmum has to receive a special tag that upgrades it to the status of kedushas damim. In these cases of Bechar and Maser, we do not have that upgrade. Once it's a balmum, then it's yatza l'chulin. I'm going to have to assume that there must be a Gzeres HaKosuv in Bechar and Maser. I don't think it's a Svara. See, Bechar is unique because it has what's called Kedusha Mirechem Imo. You don't need a Maisa Kiddush to sanctify the Bechor. Pet Rechem, the real that itself is Makadosh. So therefore, once and the entire kedusha from the beginning is only lemizbeach. So if it's not royal lemizbeach, then it's chulin. But I don't understand why that should apply to maaseh. And I'm tempted to think that even in the case of maaseh, it's a different process of kiddush, of designating it as a korban. True, you have to count 1 to 10, but once you count to number 10, automatically becomes kedushas mizbeach. It never goes through an earlier stage of kedushas damin. We jump all the way, straight away to kedushas haguf. And if that kedushas haguf is null and voided because of mum, then memel it's yotzeluchu. Mum kodem kabbalah. Now, what happens, until now we've been discussing mum before shechita. What happens if at the time of the shechita, the animal was a tamim, and now after the shechita became about mum? I think this is sugya gittin about this, but anyway, mum kodem kabbalah. Atzorim ozen akorban bein shechita lekabbalah. Again, say bein shechita lekabbalah, that's like a few seconds. But during those few seconds, he cut into the ear of the animal, and the animal became a balmum. O shechasa mevarea kolshu nifsal hakorban lekabbalah. So the psul of mum is not only relevant to shechita, it's also relevant to kabbalah. If he should never become all sadam v'lakacha kohenim mochiach midam apor, har shahoya kvar. In other words, when we get to lakichas hadam, otherwise known as kabbalah sadam, then the carbon has the same status as it was previously. Dam shukfar pa, or par shukfar carbon. That means that the din of shechita now applies to kabbalah as well. Now, when he says "O shechasa me'aver kolshu," he says in the name of the Keren Ora, "Nokat sheshirach isaran haposel ukol shenechshav mum michayim." I don't know if that's going to help us at all. I was just curious to know why he mentions chasem me'avareh kolshim. I guess he's saying if it was chasem me'avareh legamre, then for sure it would be possible. I don't need a special possible equating kabbalah with shechita because I need to be makabel adam of a carbon, but it can't. It can hardly be called a carbon if it's missing an aver, but we're talking about culture. So I don't know the mitzias exactly what culture. And finally, yesh min harishonim shekosav hu adin im nechsar hakorban bein kabbalah laholacha. Wow, now we're up to holacha. I mean, we passed the main 2 stages. We're almost around the bases. We're almost at third base. About to, circle third base to come home. He did already shechita and kabbalah. Now we had an equation between kabbalah and shechita in which we disqualified about mum even between shechita and kabbalah. But now he's past kabbalah. He's up to halacha sadam. Now, I'm not sure if he's coming up with a new category or he's saying that all 4 avodos are somehow included under this analogy of this package. Halacha is not less important than Shchita and Kabbalah. It's one of the four avodas. And for that matter, Zrika is the culmination. So we need an animal that's kosher l'mizbeach, as opposed to a balmum. But I have a feeling that this Shita Rishonim, in the footnote number Shin Lamed, he attributes this to the Shita of Bubetz. This Shita of Bubetz is talking about a new halach, a different, shall I say, category of mum haposel b'holachas adam. Oh, he says, Yesh min hasham shekasav shemum over eno bichlal psul zeh. Same Shita Megubetzes says that this halacha of mum that passes the carbon even during halacha does not apply in the case of a mum over. So we see that this halacha of a psul in halacha is a new category, because we never differentiate in hechsher carbon between mum over and mum she'eno over. And this distinction itself seems to clearly indicate that mum over, in the case of bein halacha, bein Kabbalah halacha, it's a brand new halacha. It operates in its own world. So, for example, if there was a mum over, either before Shkita or after Shkita, before Kabbalah, for sure the carbon is possible. But in the case of a mum over after Kabbalah, we're going to say it's kosher. Even though a mum over after Shkita or before Shkita is possible. So I think this is where we're going to stop for today. And Amir says, tomorrow we'll start with Zrika, Psulei Zrika.